There's a moment in life when you learn a tiny bit about something, and suddenly it feels like you understand everything. A single article makes you feel like an expert. A quick video makes a complicated field look simple. A small success convinces you that you've cracked the code. It feels good. It feels powerful. It feels like clarity. But then, as you learn just a little more, the ground drops out beneath your feet. Everything becomes messy, contradictory, confusing. The topic you thought you mastered becomes bigger than you imagined, and your confidence sinks faster than your knowledge rises. This weird roller coaster isn't a personal flaw. It's a psychological effect built into the way the human mind works. And it silently shapes arguments, careers, leadership, online debates, and even how we judge ourselves. Today, we're going to explore the Dunning-Kruger effect, the curve that explains why confidence often beats competence, and why knowing a little can be more dangerous than knowing nothing at all. There's a strange thing that happens inside the human mind. When we know very little about something, we often feel incredibly confident about it. And when we finally start to learn more, that confidence collapses. Suddenly, everything feels complicated, confusing, and uncertain. It seems backwards. It seems irrational. And yet, this quiet psychological glitch influences everyday life, online debates, leadership decisions, and even world history. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect, the moment where confidence beats competence and certainty grows fastest in the places where knowledge is smallest. But to understand why it happens, we need to start somewhere simple with the limits of our own perception. What the Dunning-Kruger effect actually is. In the late 1990s, two psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, noticed a pattern. People who performed poorly on tests didn't just score badly, they genuinely believed they were above average. They weren't lying. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They simply didn't know enough to understand how little they knew. The effect works like a mirror that bends the truth. When you lack skill, you also lack the ability to evaluate that skill. And so, without realizing it, you climb to the top of a psychological mountain, a place known as Mount Stupid, where confidence is high, but competence is low. And the moment you keep learning, that mountain collapses beneath your feet. The shape of the journey. Imagine a simple curve. At the beginning, with just a tiny amount of knowledge, confidence skyrockets. You feel like you understand everything. You feel smart. You feel capable. You may even feel like you've discovered something everyone else missed. That's Mount Stupid. But then the world reveals its complexity. You realize there are layers you never noticed, exceptions you didn't understand, techniques you didn't know existed. And suddenly confidence plunges into what many call the valley of despair. This is the moment where you understand enough to see how much you don't know. Over time, as you learn more, something smoother and quieter happens. Your confidence slowly rises again. Not dramatically, not loudly, but steadily, the slope of enlightenment, until eventually knowledge and confidence align. Experts rarely sound certain, not because they're insecure, but because they recognize the space between knowing and not knowing. Why the effect happens. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't a flaw in intelligence. It's a side effect of how the brain works. First, when someone lacks skill, they also lack the ability to recognize what good skill looks like. A beginner at piano cannot hear the difference between decent and excellent. A beginner in investing cannot see the risks that experts see immediately. A beginner in writing may not notice weak structure or unclear logic. Second, the brain loves simple stories. If something appears easy on the surface, we assume it is easy. Languages, economics, psychology, fitness, politics, all look simple until you dive beneath the surface. Third, minimal exposure creates an illusion of mastery. Learning one new fact feels like unlocking the whole system, until the rest of the system reminds you it's much bigger than you thought. Real-life examples. You see the Dunning-Kruger effect everywhere, and often in ways that are unintentionally funny. Ask a group of people if they're better than average drivers. Most will say yes. Statistically impossible, but psychologically predictable. Ask someone who watched a single video about investing. They might think they've discovered the secret pattern that everyone else is too blind to see. Ask someone who just started learning a new language. They may feel fluent after memorizing a handful of phrases, until they try to have a real conversation. And online, especially online people with the least understanding, often speak with the most certainty. Not because they're malicious, but because they don't yet see the complexity. The Dunning-Kruger effect turns a little knowledge into a loud voice. The other side, why experts doubt themselves. There's a second part to the Dunning-Kruger effect. While beginners are overly confident, experts tend to underestimate themselves. Why? Because the more they learn, the more they see the edges of the unknown. They understand the exceptions, the nuances, the contradictions. Their confidence is grounded in reality, not illusion. An expert knows what questions still remain unanswered. A beginner doesn't know those questions exist. This is why the most skilled people often say, "I'm not sure, it depends," or "there's more to it." It isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Why this effect is dangerous. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not just an interesting curiosity, it has real consequences. It creates leaders who sound confident but lack competence. It creates arguments where the loudest voice drowns out the most informed one. It creates misunderstandings, false certainty, and decisions based on shallow understanding. Worst of all, it can trap people in a bubble where they stop learning because they believe they already know enough. Confidence feels good. Competence is harder, and the gap between the two can cause real harm. The original research. In their original study, Dunning and Kruger asked students to rate their abilities in logic, humor, and grammar, then compared those ratings to their actual performance. The bottom performers consistently judged themselves to be above average. They didn't realize their mistakes. They didn't see the gaps in their knowledge. And they didn't have the tools to evaluate their own skill. Later research repeated the findings across many fields: medicine, finance, business, science, and everyday tasks. The pattern was universal. Humans are not great at estimating their own competence, especially when they have very little of it. How to recognize it in yourself. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't something that happens to other people. It happens to all of us. You can spot it in yourself by asking a few questions. Have I only just begun learning this? Do I think this topic is simple? Do I feel certain before I feel educated? Can I explain this concept clearly, step by step? Can I name experts who disagree with my conclusion? If the answer to these questions is uncomfortable, that's a sign you're standing somewhere on Mount Stupid. And the good news is, awareness is the first step off of it. How to avoid the trap. Escaping the Dunning-Kruger effect does not require genius talent or special training. It requires humility, intellectual humility. Ask more questions than you answer. Search for feedback instead of validation. Study your mistakes instead of hiding them. Remember that learning is not a straight line. It's a gradual climb marked by confusion, clarity, and correction. The more you learn, the less certain you may feel. But that's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of growth. The final insight. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not a joke about foolish people. It's a mirror held up to every mind, yours, mine, and everyone else's. It reminds us that certainty is not proof of understanding, and confidence is not proof of competence. True knowledge is quiet. It listens more than it speaks. It asks questions more than it delivers answers. And as it grows, it replaces ego with curiosity. The next time someone sounds absolutely sure of something, after learning very little, remember the curve, the climb up Mount Stupid, the fall into the valley of despair, and the slow rise of real wisdom. Confidence is loud when knowledge is small, but competence grows quietly, humbly, until eventually it speaks for itself. When you take a step back and look at the Dunning-Kruger curve, the picture becomes almost poetic. Confidence rising from ignorance, doubt rising from knowledge, wisdom living somewhere in between. It's a reminder that the loudest voice isn't always the most informed. That certainty is not a sign of mastery. That humility isn't a weakness, it's a form of intelligence. The people who know the least often sound the most sure. The people who know the most often sound the most cautious. And both groups are simply responding to how the human brain interprets complexity. Understanding this effect doesn't make you immune to it, but it makes you aware. It helps you pause before declaring something simple. It helps you stay curious instead of defensive. And it helps you keep climbing that slow, steady slope where real competence grows. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay thoughtful, stay humble. And remember that learning is not a race toward certainty, but a journey toward clarity.